here are our objectives for section 2.3. Calculate a line slope, write the point slope form of the equation of a line, write and graph the slope-intercept form of the equation of a line, graph horizontal or vertical lines, recognize and use the general form of a line's equation, use the intercepts to graph the general form of a line's equation, and model data with linear functions and make predictions. Yay! It does sound like a lot of work, but none of it is hard, right? Okay? So, let's talk about slope first. How many different ways do you know that you can define slope? Rise over run. How else? M. Okay. How else?
Miss Kingston?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have Peyton Lee?
Yes, I do.
Could you send her to the office, please?
Can she come in about 10 minutes?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So change in y over change in x, which also leads us to this one, right? And just to make sure we all understand, we could actually use this as well, right? Those are all the same thing, aren't they? Just different ways to represent slope, okay? This is all about slope. So if I give you a point, 2 points, so 2, 6, and 4, 9. If I give you those 2 points, can you calculate the slope of this line? So this is x1 and y1. This is x2 and y2. Could I have called this x2 and y2 and x1 and y1? Yeah, just randomly labeling. I just can't call this one x1 and y2, right? I have to keep the first point together and the second point together. So typically this is the equation you're used to using, but again, it doesn't matter as long as you line up which point you use first and which one you use second. It doesn't matter, does it? Okay? So we can say y2, which is 9, y sub 2 minus y sub 1, which is 6, over x sub 2, which is 4, minus x sub 1, which is 2. So 9 minus 6 is 3, and 4 minus 2 is 2. So the slope of the line that passes through these 2 points would be 3/2. Do I need to do a bunch more examples? Okay, no, we're good. Please don't. Okay, excellent. Okay. So that's our first objective, calculate a line slope. Okay. Write the point slope form of the equation of a line. Let's just go with these 2 points. We're already here talking about them. In order to do the point slope form, do you remember what point slope form is? That's slope-intercept. Remember, I'm asking about point slope. So it looks like this. Right? Now, if I'm trying to figure this out, there's some variables that I want to plug stuff in for, and there's other variables that I don't want to plug stuff in for, right? I want this to remain a y, and I want this to remain an x. I can substitute in for everything else, but this needs to say a y, and this needs to say an x, right? So if we're using using these 2 points that we just have, we've already calculated the slope, so I could already substitute that for m, right? So what would I substitute for y sub 1? Well, I have y sub 1 right here that I even labeled when I was trying to find my slope. Could I use that? Could I also use 9? Yes, if I used 4 when it was time, right? So y minus 6 equals 3/2 x minus, and I use the 6, so I need to use the 2. Okay? So now it just depends on what you're being asked, okay? Because if it says write the point slope form of the equation of the line, isn't that the point slope form of the equation of the line? Could we simplify this? Yeah, we could, right? But if it asks for the point slope form equation of the line, that's it. That's the answer. Okay? Now it may ask you for, well, if it asks you for an equation of the line, that's done. That's a perfectly fine equation, isn't it? If it asks for a point slope form, that's done because that's definitely point slope form. But it may ask for the slope-intercept form of the equation. You can start with point slope form even to get to the slope-intercept form of the equation. Okay? And the way you do that is just by simplifying what we have. Okay? Distributing this 3/2 here and here gets us y minus 6 equals 3/2 x minus 3. Right? Because 3/2 times -2 would be -6/2, which would be -3. And then I could add 6 to both sides to get y equals 3/2 x plus 3. And to me, that's the cool part because we started with point slope and we actually end up in slope-intercept. Okay? So we've done Objective 1, talking about the slope. We've done Objective 2 in writing a point slope form of the equation. We've also kind of talked about writing and graphing slope-intercept form of the equation. Okay? We've written it. Do we need to go into great detail about how to graph it? What is important for you to know if I give you this and say graph it? What is this? That's the y-intercept, and that's where we start. That's exactly right. After we have the y-intercept, then what do? Use the slope. So rise 3 and run 2 from that y-intercept point, right? And then after that, you really only need 2 points to make a line, but rising 3 and running 2, rising 3, running 2, rising 3, running 2, giving you multiple points gives you a better picture of the line, correct? Okay? Do I need to do any more examples? You got that. I know you're confident in this. Good job. Okay? So the next part of our objective, or the next number on our objective, is graph horizontal and vertical lines. Okay? Most people just forget about graphing horizontal and vertical lines because they want it to be difficult. I don't know. When in fact, graphing horizontal and vertical lines are quite easy, aren't they? If this is my x and my y-axis, and I say, I need you to graph the equation y equals 2, how do I graph that equation? Well, it's a line that crosses the y-axis at 2, so knowing that it crosses the y-axis at 2, that means it is a horizontal line, right? Crosses at 2, horizontal line, done. Okay? If I ask for x equals -4, that's a line that crosses the x-axis at -4. And since it's crossing the x-axis, it is a vertical line. Okay? Any questions about that? Feeling confident about that? Okay. Recognize and use the general form of a line's equation. Now, in high school, not that we're not there now, but in high school math, we always called this the standard form. Okay? In this textbook, they call it the general form. So just to make sure you remember what that is ax plus by equals c. That's what they're calling the standard form. Thank you, SAN. We called it the standard form. They're calling it the general form. I wanted to write both words, but then I said it the wrong way. So please forgive me. Okay? We called it the standard. They're calling it the general. All right? So what you're going to need to do on the homework here is take an equation, for example, in slope-intercept form, and move it to general form. All right? So if it's okay with you, we'll just use this one that we already developed from all of our work up here. Is that okay? So if we have y equals 3/2 x plus 3, how do we go about getting it into this form? We need to scoot the x over first of all, right? Okay? So subtracting 3/2 x from both sides gives me -3/2 x plus y equals 3. And you would think that's kind of close, right? But you need to remember a couple rules here. Okay? A has to be positive. And A has to be not a fraction. And B has to be not a fraction. Okay? Typically C is not also, but hopefully you'll figure that out by the fact that A and B are not as well. Okay? So how am I going to get rid of that fraction on A, and how am I going to get rid of the negative sign on A? It's already being divided by 2, so I could do the inverse of that, which is multiplying by 2, right? I could actually even kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I'm sorry for saying kill at school. But instead of multiplying it by 2, I could actually multiply it by negative 2, right? That would take care of the fact that A needs to be a positive number. Okay? So if I multiply every single thing in the equation by negative 2, that gives me 3x minus 2y equals negative 6. And that is the standard form, or general form of this equation. I'm waiting. Did I mess up? Okay. Yeah, B can be negative, just A cannot. Yep. Yep, that's fine. Any questions about that? We okay so far? Recognize and use is what we just did. Recognize and use the general form. Use intercepts to graph the general form of the line's equation. Okay? So if you're given the general form, like this example that we just did, how would I find the intercepts of this graph in order to graph it? Do you remember how to find the x-intercept if it's in general form? To find the x-intercept, we're going to let y equal 0. Well, if y equals 0, it's going to look something like this, isn't it? Something 0, because I'm letting y equal 0. What happens when I let y equal 0? What does x equal? Like I literally just put my finger over it because it's equal to 0, right? So 3x equals negative 6, so what does x equal? Negative 2. Okay? So use your context clues or your memory and tell me how to find the y-intercept. So let x equal 0. So 0 something, right? Again, I'm letting x equal 0, so y is going to equal 3. Okay? Can you plot these 2 points on a graph? Where do I go for this one? So right there? No? Yes? Because x is negative 2 and then y is 0, so right there. And what about this one? Right there? Ta-da. Okay? Easy? That's 2.3.